All right, well, welcome back to another episode of Generation to Generation Bridging the Gap with Rex.
And Eva, and we're so excited to have you here with us today. Why don't you tell them what we're talking about?
We're actually talking about your story. We're going to talk about Eva today.
Oh my goodness, we last week we talked about your story, and the week before we talked about just what gave us the inspiration to do this, and so we thought we would reintroduce ourselves. If you've missed that, we're your co-hosts. We host this, and I'm his daughter, and so it's a lot of fun. He has a lot more experience than I do in life, but it's exciting, and I'm excited because I think that I've been through a lot. It may not have impacted me the way, but I think I've experienced a lot of things. There's been some big moments in the world that I've seen, cough COVID, cough, that have shaped and changed the way my life is versus how you grew up. Growing up with technology was something entirely different than yours. And it's a cool story. And I think for a long time I didn't like it as much, which I'll probably get into a little bit. But it was just very interesting. But I guess we should start from the beginning since that's probably the most important part. But
Yeah, you
I
want me to
made
give some
yeah. Why
context to
don't you? Because you
that?
probably know that better than me. I was
Yeah,
probably not fully conscious the first 2 years of understanding what's going on in my life, and so
well, I was just going to add one little element of context for what you just said. You were talking about yeah, COVID that you've been through. We didn't go through anything like that when I was a kid. Generations are formed by the challenges that you go through. And we've talked about this with your grandfather, my dad, not one, but two very significant events. During his formative years, he went through the Great Depression as a young boy. Then, as an 18-year-old, he went off to World War II. Okay, well, fast forward to my generation, we were teenagers at the end of Vietnam, which was the first war on television. That was extremely shocking, to be honest about it. Nobody had ever seen a nightly broadcast where you could actually see people being killed on a battlefield. And then we had the first resignation of a sitting United States president, which was Richard Nixon, and that was shocking. And we had the kind of the hippie movement going on in the 60s, and I came in on the tail end of that. But it was just kind of this tumultuous time. Civil rights legislation was going on. We passed a civil rights bill in 1964. I was only 4 years old, but I remember the night that Martin Luther King got assassinated in Memphis, happened to be in Memphis at that point. And so just some tumultuous events. Well, then fast forward to you. You went through COVID as a teenager. And so we never went through any type of global pandemic when I was your age. So it's all relative. And I was talking to someone at breakfast this morning. Sometimes I really wish that you would have had some of the experiences that I had as a kid. And I kind of, reflect on that. But you've had some experiences that are really, really cool that I didn't have. So it's kind of this balancing act of, we tend to mirror image. We've talked about that a lot. Hey, I wanted you to have the exact experiences that I had as a kid. Well, that's just not possible. JH Ranch was an example. I wanted you to experience a camp because I went to summer camp every summer with the Boy Scouts and it was a big deal. You didn't have that every summer, but there were other experiences that you had that were really cool. So with that, that just kind of gives some context of this progression
yeah.
between the generations.
Well, for sure. And you said, you wanted a mirror image of it, but we do have a lot of similarities with, our lives, right? We're both adopted. I'm adopted. Y'all had been married, what, 14 years? Whatever, when I came along. I don't know exactly how long it was. But y'all had been married a while before I came along in
We had
2006.
a child for 14 years.
Okay, okay. Haven't heard. I don't know how long y'all had been married at that point. Um,
We had been
but
married, I'm doing the quick math, We had been married 14 years when you came along.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I've just
yeah,
heard Mama tell that.
yep.
Um, so we both share that similarity, and that's something you've probably heard us talk about it before, but something that like there are some things that are very similar. Like Paul, your father, I call him Paul, telling you if I could choose any little boy in the world, I would always choose you. And you told me the same thing. If I could choose any little girl in the world to be my daughter, I would always choose you. And so there's some things that overlap. And it's very interesting. I don't necessarily remember much of the first couple years of my life. Granted, I was like 2 or 3. I have some very distinct memories of like my 3rd birthday party being princess themed or sitting on your lap playing with my Winnie the Pooh telephone. But I really didn't start remembering things until about 4. And that's the start of like the good and the bad, really, and what has happened so far in this quote unquote first quarter of my life. 4 was really when I kind of was growing into my own personality. I was probably a little stubborn, a little hard-headed still. I'm still hard-headed sometimes, but I also started school then, and my first couple years of education, as great as they were not the best teacher-wise. There was some verbal, emotional, I guess physical in some sense, abuse in the classroom. But being as a 4-year-old, you don't know that a teacher's not supposed to be like that. You don't know that a teacher's not supposed to put you in timeout for 3 days because you whispered into a classmate's ear, my house is bigger than yours, talking about the building block house, or that you're not supposed to stand in the corner for an hour and a half because you counted too fast and things. And so that was just very like ingrained in my education until 2nd or 3rd grade when we started to get a little bit better teachers. Was that's how I thought it was supposed to be. And growing on into middle school, when I finally switched schools, and it wasn't because of these teachers or anything, the school I had just started at closed, I didn't realize how much those fundamental years of education like had shaped me and how it impacted the way I view learning and the way I view knowledge. And I remember you're very good at math. We've talked about this. You were an accountant by education, you did math in the Army, you did all of these things, and I remember you used to just sit and try and help me with my math homework in middle school. And so this is what I'm probably 12 now. 6th grade was really when my math started going downhill, and you'd go, I don't get why you can't just do this mentally. Like, why can't you just see the numbers and add them and things? And that was really one of the, I think, we talked about how we never really disagreed until we did the podcast, but we used to fight over math a lot because you would try and get it to do one way and I would do the problem an entirely different way, and generally I would get the right solution, but it wouldn't have been how you would do it, and we would get into disagreement. And so it was things like that. And then COVID hit, which I've kind of glossed over a lot, but I don't remember much of it. I don't remember much of, I remembered if I could talk about stories, but I don't remember like what my day-to-day life was like and things like that. And COVID hit in 7th grade, March of 7th grade. But what was really funny is I had just had tonsil surgery about a month before COVID hit, and I had been out for 3 weeks recovering from that. I came back to school for a week, and then COVID hit, and I didn't go back. And so it was like going downhill into middle school. Was I had not been in school for a month. I didn't have any of this makeup work. COVID happened. We really didn't know what was going on. Our teachers didn't know how to get us the work. And COVID was the greatest time of my life, which I know sounds so awful because it was such a dark time for the world. But the problem is, well, not really the problem, because it was pretty great. But the meaning behind that is when did you get on staff at the church?
I started full time in 2016.
Okay, so I was 10,
Mm-hmm.
but before that you had been part-time for quite a few years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
so from like what, probably like 7 to 13, I would spend 14 hours, 10, 14 hours on Sundays at the church, which is great. But me and the other pastors' kids, the other staff kids, we were like destructive as all get out because we were bored. But it was I was very used to, like, we had to cut our vacation short because you could only miss so many Sundays, and you were gone a lot of the nights of the week. Mama was gone because she was doing conferences a lot of the nights of the week. We really didn't eat dinner as a family all the time. We would eat really late. I would go to bed. There was a lot of babysitters. And it worked great because I could go with y'all to the church a lot and spend time, and I had great friends there. But when COVID hit, all of a sudden, our world stopped. Rather than just slowing down like a little bit, like, you were home every single night. Mama was home every single night. We spent every single minute together for months. And it was wonderful because we ate dinner together as a family. I fell in love with cooking during that time because we got, like, this, like, the box meals that, like, you would cook. And I learned how to cook during then, and it became just, I don't know, a relaxation thing for me. So I found the joy of, like, cooking foods and serving y'all. And Mama and I got to cook in the kitchen a ton, and we played board games every single night. And, school really was not a priority at this point because none of the teachers really knew how to get us stuff. So it was like 4 months of my life that just stopped, and it was just the three of us. And, Mama had retired in 2015, 2016, I don't know. She had retired, so she'd been home more, but she still kept herself busy. And so for the first time in my entire life, y'all were home every single night without fail. There were no late nights of work. There were no weekends y'all were gone for stuff. And it changed our relationship. I think that's really where you and I started talking, was we would sit on the back porch together on the bed swings, and we would just talk for hours. Or we would play board games, and we would just talk for hours. I got into reading then. Like, really, I started to grow into myself and who I was and what my interests were during that, 4 or 5 month period where the world slowed down. And then COVID stopped, and I had the opportunity to go back to my brick and mortar school for 8th grade. And I said, I said, I am perfectly fine doing my classes online. This is great for me. I like being home, which is so funny because everybody would have believed I was an extrovert until that point. And I was like, nope, I can do all of my classes in 4 hours. Why would I go to school for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, when I can get the same amount of work and the same education here at home, and I can do what I love? I can cook, I can read, I can spend time with y'all. And it was wonderful. And I think my class was fully convinced that we packed up and moved to the beach because we would join calls so often at the beach, because that's just what we did. Now that we had gotten back to that routine and the world kept moving, we still prioritized, spending time together. And then we moved, which was crazy because I had spent the entirety of my life in one city and in one house. And then we moved to this place that, used to be this big city that we would go to get fancy dresses, or, you had a work event. And we moved to Birmingham, and I was all for it. I don't think y'all thought I was going to be so prepared and so ready for it, but I remember y'all sat me down, and I was sitting in the chairs in the living room, and you said, we've been given this job opportunity to go to Birmingham. What are your thoughts about it? And I think without hesitation, I said, I think you should take it. Like, that's a great idea. Like, I'm ready to go. I'm not really close with any of my friends anymore. The people I'm close with don't even live in the same city anymore. Like, let's go. I was so ready for it. There had been some distance between some of me and my friends just because of COVID, because we all grew up and started growing into ourselves and what we liked, and they just didn't align anymore. We couldn't just run into each other in the church hallways and pick up where we left off, because now we had our own interests and our own friends. And I was for it. I was like, let's go. Like, I took my bed apart myself. Like, I moved everything out of my room. I was so ready. And we got up here, and it was fantastic. But where was I going to go to school? Well, I joined this classical online school that I followed my best friend from Montgomery to. And it was wonderful. I instantly made friends. I continued to live by the mindset of I can go to school for 12 hours a week and still get more work done than my classmates who go 8 hours a day. It was wonderful. I thrived in it. I got into a good group of friends. I was active in the church. Like, I had a good core group, because for, I think, the last couple years of my life, I had really stepped away from God. Not intentionally, but it was just like I began to see church as a place y'all worked, and not as a place of worship, and not as, my relationship with God was not growing just because I was always there. It was not a place that the church became a place of work, essentially. It was no longer the house. It was a place of work. And so when I saw it, I thought of the long hours we had spent there, and all of the hours playing hide and seek, and it was not special in my heart anymore, and I was not growing in this relationship. And I think a lot of pastors' kids deal with that. I think a lot of kids that have grown up in the church, so much in the church, really have a hard time understanding what their relationship with God is, and I think that's why a lot of them step away from it. So getting that fresh start here in Birmingham, it was amazing, because now the church, like, people went from, and I had said this before, but people in Montgomery had known me my entire life. And so I was always Rex and Lisa Davis's daughter. People that had known me from 4 or 5 years old from y'all's, small groups, they'd come up to me and be like, oh, I remember when you were a little girl. And I felt like there was no room for me to grow up, because everybody had this image of who I was when they first met me. And so coming here and making my own friends, y'all became Eva's parents. Y'all didn't become, I was not Rex and Lisa Davis's daughter as much anymore as y'all were Eva's parents. And that was just a huge flip, because now I had my own identity. I had my own friends. I was still your daughter, and I'm not ashamed of that, but it was just, for the first time in my life, I was being seen as who I am now and not who I was 10 years ago. And so it was wonderful. And I had some great friends at school. I had great friends at church. And then into sophomore year happens. And kind of lose all of it. A lot of them go to different schools. A lot of those friends move churches. My friend group at school fell apart. And all of a sudden I was by myself again. And that's fine. I do good by myself. I'm an only child. Like, I know how to be by myself, but I had gotten so used to, like, having things to do and having places to be. And going into junior year, it was really, really hard on me, because I didn't really have any friends at school. I really didn't have, my best friend had left the school that we were at. She had gone to a school in her own city. I didn't really have any friends at church anymore, because they had all left. And so I was like, is this right? Am I doing the right thing? And so my relationship with God grew. But the problem was, school got harder. And we talked about it a minute ago. I talked about it a minute ago. But school and I didn't have the best relationship. And so junior year was so incredibly hard on me, mentally and emotionally, because it was so draining. I had had some bad experiences with teachers all throughout my education, and so I really began to define my worth by my grade. And for context, I'm fully ranting here in a second, but I had gotten feedback on a paper I was really proud of my sophomore year. And essentially the feedback on it was, I don't know what I was expecting, it wasn't this, and quite frankly, I'm disappointed by that. And hearing that come from a teacher that you, like, deeply respected, and you were really proud of that paper, it wrecked me. And all of a sudden, all of these years of, like, academic trauma, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's the word I'm using, trauma, came crashing down. I hit the ground hard, and I crashed, essentially. And I cheated on a paper because I could not find my academic worth. I did not know what teachers expected of me, and you talked about this in your story a little bit, but I had a terrible imposter syndrome. Like how you talked about not believing you could be a pastor because of, your dad being one, and how big he was. I had the same way about school. Was these people that I was classmates with and these teachers, I felt so inferior to them. I felt so incredibly stupid next to them, and I compromised my integrity. I had to work through that. I had no ability to believe in who I was and my intelligence and my smarts and the gifts God had given me. And so it was like the second semester of my junior year was one of probably the hardest times that I had gone through. Pause.
No, let's put some legs on that,
Yeah.
and let people know what was it that you compromised.
Oh,
I think
well,
that'll be helpful.
I cheated on a paper. I used AI, which is the biggest temptation probably of what's going on in our generation, because I believed that I wasn't capable of it. I didn't believe that I was smart enough, that I was eloquent enough. I had teachers tell me, I had some that really championed me. I had a science teacher. I'm not very good at math. I'm better now. Was not very good at math. I had a teacher sit with me, shout out Miss Equine, for 15 hours and teach me all the math I needed to know for physics and chemistry. But that was different because it was a science class. And so I knew she believed in me, but I didn't really have that connection with my English and history teacher. And so I was so intimidated, especially sitting in that class and hearing my classmates talk. I I compromised my integrity. We signed an academic integrity pledge that says all of our work will be our own, that we will do everything on our own, and I didn't. I broke it, and it was
Which
the
is unusual, by the
yeah.
way. I just want to make sure that people understand because there are some schools now that openly allow the use of AI in their papers. That's fine. That's a decision that different school districts make. But in your particular global homeschool, they just made a policy, hey, there will be no AI allowed whatsoever in papers, and the instructors use filters that will detect AI. And so that's what we're talking about.
Yep, 100%. And so I I did not believe in myself. And what I'm about to say makes no sense, but me getting caught for cheating on that paper was the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. Which sounds awful because from the months of February to May of 2024 were probably the worst months of my life, but they created the greatest outcome of who I came. Like I came out of it so much better than I had entered into it. Y'all were very strict with y'all's punishment, which is totally valid. I had broken y'all's trust, I had broken the teacher's trust, but the big thing was I had to go everywhere y'all went. I had to sit downstairs and do every bit of homework. I had to actively engage in every single class. I had to talk about, like, there was so much I did to work to rebuild that trust. And Mama's talked about it some in previous episodes, but we have this thing called a circle of trust. And it's like a circle, and y'all stand in the center of it. And the more trust, the closer I am to the center of the circle, the more freedom, the more trust I have. Well, I had stepped out of that when I compromised it, my integrity, and it pushed me. Like, I wasn't going to sit in class and not pay attention, because now I had that zero sitting on my record that I had to bring up in exams and everything, or otherwise I wouldn't pass the class. And during this time, I was terrified I wouldn't get into college because I knew that the colleges were going to expect me to talk about this. And so there was just a lot going on. And we were reading this book called The Fairy Queen, which I've talked about some during my history class. And this is the class I had cheated in, Mr. Choi's class. And I was like, I was bored out of my mind. I wasn't allowed to play video games. I wasn't allowed to watch movies. I wasn't allowed to stay at home anymore. I had to go with y'all everywhere. And so I just read the book, which you should be like, Eva, why aren't you reading the book? But when you read 25 books a year for one single class, you don't always read the book entirely. Every single one of my classmates probably can admit to that. There are probably quite a few books that they have not read in full, because you've got other assignments and all these things. And so I poured myself into it. And in class, learning came to life for me, because I saw myself in that character. I saw myself in Red Cross's character. He was given this journey and this purpose by the Fairy Queen, who resembles God in this story, to go slay the dragon and free his kingdom. And then he has this friend Arthur, who's on his own journey to meet the queen, but along the way comes along and says, hey, I'm going to help you, put your armor back on to help clean you up and to help send you back on your way. And my best friend had been that Arthur for me. She had stood by me the entire time. She was the only person y'all allowed me to talk to, really, friend-wise, was y'all let me call her every single day. And I would stay on FaceTime with her for hours. And it was just this beautiful moment of, I was so broken that the only way for me to go was up. And I fell in love with learning again. In April of last year, I was helping a girl with her homework, and the words on the page realigned themselves. It said, can you imagine a future where this is not your everyday? And all of a sudden, doors opened for me to go to school to be a teacher. What I thought was a different calling. I thought I was going to go in entertainment, music management. Like, I thought I was, I wanted to own a managing company for music artists. All those things was a big passion of mine. All of a sudden, flipped a switch. But I would not have known that had I not been actively seeking to rebuild my relationship with my teachers, with my parents, with God, because I had kind of put that on the back burner. I would not have heard him when he called me to that. And so it rocked my world, because these plans I had been making for 2 years just went out the window in a single afternoon. And it was the greatest thing. And then all of a sudden the next book we read was by Shakespeare. And then it was just this great moment. And my teacher, the same teacher that I had been so intimidated by, like, I think he wrote an email to me, and he was just talking about how proud he was of how much I had engaged in that class, and how proud he was to see learning come to life for me. And this was the first time that learning began to mean something to me, as I wasn't doing it for a grade anymore. I was doing it because I wanted to better myself. And so I still don't have any friends at this point. Like, I really was very much alone. And so the end of the year comes, I do great on exams. I'm standing at the event we go to at the end of the year in the coffee shop with all of my classmates and everything. And my science teacher, Miss Ekholm, who I talked about, she came in, tears pouring down her face. She like has been running around the lodge looking for me. Comes down, tears pouring down her face, and she goes, "Eva, I'm so proud of you. You got an A on your exam, and I just put it into the grade book, and it means you get an A for the year." So we're standing in the coffee shop. That was the first A I had gotten in a math-based class since like 5th grade. And so when I applied myself, when I had teachers who believed in me, all of a sudden, this, what I had been defining myself, my worth by, I was seeing that reward. And so it was this moment of like, I was so embarrassed for the mistakes I had made, but when there was redemption right in front of me, and there was a new path right in front of me, and God made it very clear in the middle of all of this is like, your story's not over yet. You haven't, what I thought, I was like, oh gosh, I'm never going to be able to go to college now because like I'm going to have these bad grades because I have terrible math grades and all of these things. And God was like, your story's not done. You still have a purpose and you still have a plan, and I'm going to make a way. And throughout the next year, his hand was in every single thing in my life. I should not have gotten into the college I got into because I didn't have the GPA. I should not have gotten into the honors college. I didn't have the SAT or the GPA. But his hand has been in it every single step, and it's constantly reaffirmed, I am smart. I am a good student. I am capable. And I told myself in September, when school started, I said, I'm going to lock in and make good friends. I'm going to make good friends that are going to champion me, that are going to encourage me, and I'm going to learn to see them as classmates and not as competitors. And it was this great moment of my first semester senior thesis, which we've talked about some, but it was this 20-page paper I had to write, and a speech and a defense I had to do to graduate. Well, we got put in writing groups, which is like during all our Wednesday classes, we would just go to the writing group, and the 5 students would work together on their theses, ask questions, and just help each other out. Well, the 4 students that were in my group were the students that I had been most intimidated by all of high school. The people that in every single class I had been scared to talk to, I've been scared to share my opinion in front of because they were so incredibly smart, and they became the biggest supporters of my paper. And if that isn't God's like saying, oh look, you aren't just this. And so it was just a cool moment of I made such incredible friends, but these people I had been terrified of. It was the scariest moment when I read that document that told me who my writing group was, but by the end of it, they became some of the biggest supporters of my work. And they helped me so much. I helped them a lot. Granted, I think I was more comedic relief in some areas, but that's totally all right. But it was this moment of just full redemption. A lot like in The Fairy Queen, which is one of my favorite stories of all time, there was this redemption. In the story, Red Cross, he falls in the House of Pride and all of these things, and he takes off his armor, which is like symbolic of like the armor of God, and he has to work his way back up, but he eventually completes his goal. And I had walked that same exact path. I had this armor on, I had this foundation, and then all of a sudden I fell, I stumbled, and then I had friends help build me back up, and I had this redemption, I had this thesis, I had all of this work. And what's really crazy is the same teacher of the class I had cheated on the paper on, I willingly chose to be the teacher that I was writing the biggest paper of my life for, to prove that I could do it. I wanted to prove to him that his work put in me and his investment in me was not for nothing. And so I chose his class. I was put with the students I had been most intimidated by, and it was wonderful. And I've made some of the greatest friends of my life. And that was really fundamental. Like COVID, even though it was a great moment in my childhood, was this great thing, there had been so much building up to this fault, to this crash and burn, that I don't think I had ever really processed. And so, it was this moment of like, now I'm about to go see all of them for the last time when I graduate. And I think it's going to be the most bittersweet moment of my life, because like these people that I spent so many years being terrified of have now become my best friends, and these people that I had been so scared of call me weekly just to talk. And they buy me ducks. Like one of them, this is so funny, but I kid you not, today, one of the kids in my class that I've been so scared of all 4 years of high school, because he's just so incredibly smart. He texts me today and he just goes, "Hey Eva, I bought you a duck, like a rubber duck." He goes, "I'm gonna give it to you at link." He goes, "I saw your video that you posted about like your collection of ducks and noticed you didn't have this one, so I bought you a duck." And it's just, he would never have known me had I not also pressed in and made that friendship. And at the end of the day, he's not this big, scary person. Yes, he's a lot smarter than me, but I'm smarter in some areas too. And so it was this moment of like, I had to love myself, but I also had to understand that there were so many people for me and not against me.
Eva, there is so much leadership gold in what you just said. I don't even know that I can summarize that in 1 to 2 sentences, but you covered so many topics. But I love your heart. I love the journey that you have been on. Just the transparency, the openness, the honesty, the willingness to evaluate the lessons that you've learned. And again, for some people, they may go, well, that, like the cheating thing. AI, what's the big deal? You used AI on a paper. Well, don't miss the point. Just because one school allows that, the point is your school doesn't allow it. You signed an honor code that you would not do that. You did, you compromised. That's just the environment that you were in, but the way that you owned it, and you came back and you rebounded from that. Just an amazing story, even. Let me brag on you a little bit, because I don't know that we've ever covered this. But you said you didn't have the GPA, you didn't have the ACT or SAT scores to get in the college you got into. Maybe not, but let me tell you what you did have. They invited 100 people to try out for their honors program, and you had to sit in, those 100 people had to sit in a mock class where there was a reading that you had read in advance. Then you came into the classroom and you had to be prepared to discuss that reading with other students that you'd never met in your life. 100 students, 40, only 40 of those students got invited back to be involved in the honors program this fall, and you're one of those 40 that got invited back. So you obviously made an impression in the way that you're able to interact with people in your discussions, the ability that you have to make a point, to defend your point, and I give great credence to your school for that in the way that they've prepared all of you guys. But one of the big things you said that I love is the fact that you were so intimidated by the 4 other students that you got placed in the writing group. John Maxwell says this: if you're the smartest person in the room or the smartest person in the group, well, that's a problem, because you're not going to be able to get any better if we don't have people around us that we're associating with, that are challenging us, that are stretching us, that are introducing us to different ways to see a problem, to think about a problem. And that's what those 4 people did for you. And I love what you said. Okay, they may be the ones that have the big academic reputation, maybe the intellectual reputation. You have more of a fun reputation, but you put that together, there's things that you bring to the table that they just don't have. And I think they've recognized that in you. And it's been very beneficial for all of you this entire school year. So hats off to you, Eva Davis.
It's been incredible, because I think, like, the honors college, if I had interviewed for it a year ago in February of 2024 instead of February of 2025, I would not have gotten in. But there was such a year of growth in my life that, y'all, when I had cheated on that paper, we were sitting in the living room and you were like, you can use this lesson to either let it like stop you and keep you where you are, or you can use it as a lesson to grow and to grow beyond it and to grow above, and let it make an impact on your life. And it did. I chose the second option. I chose to let it grow and to let it change me, and to let it, and rather than sitting in it and defining my worth by it, I let it say, no, this is a mistake I made and I'm going to learn from it and not make it again. And going into my senior year classes, I was, for the first time entering a school class since middle school, I was not scared. And I went into all of these classes with new teachers, and I lived by the mindset now of, don't be scared to ask for help, because chances are somebody in the room as well also has the same question and they're just too scared to ask it. And I learned that in my math class, of all places. I would ask questions that seemed so incredibly simple, but then 3 or 4 people would come on in the chat and be like, oh my gosh, I had the same exact question. I didn't know how to ask it. And all of a sudden I was like, that's one thing I have. I have a lot of confidence in life. I'm not very much of a person to be scared to ask a question, because the worst they can say is no. And if they're going to laugh at me for asking a question, that's their loss, not mine, because it means they probably didn't know how to answer it. And it became this moment of like, oh my gosh, like, no, there are things that I am good at. Going into this senior year, my history class, I had a brand new teacher, and he's one of the legends at our school. There's a couple of teachers that we just really like define by like how amazing of a teacher they are. And I was a little scared of it. But I said, you know what? I'm going to go into this with the same passion, the same love that I had with the Fairy Queen, with Othello, and I'm going to go into it. And I fell in love with learning again. For the first time, my class was not something I had to do, it was something I got to do. Learning these things, it became such a joy in my life to learn philosophy and to read about, these characters in these books, and I had such a deep appreciation for it. You're reading through a lot of the books that I've read this year just because of how much I've talked about them, how much I've learned. And I got really lucky. And I've said this, God made it very clear to me when I was going through everything that I had a greater plan than I realized. And there was something I think it was Jensen Franklin, but it may have been Rich Wilkerson Jr. had said, and it was like, what you may see as your final step is just the first of many steps that God sees, but you can't, and they said it on stage Sunday. What you think is the last chapter of the book, God's just starting a new one, like a new chapter. And it was this moment of God's faithfulness has been so present in my life in the last year. Every single achievement, every single thing that I've put my mind to, his hand has been on it. And I've joked that I should call this year things I should be more nervous for, but I'm probably not. And, like waiting for a dorm thing. I'm like, I'm not nervous. I was like not ever nervous about getting into college. I was never nervous about getting into the honors college, because I said if it's God's will, he's going to make a way. God has his hand in it. And during the honors college classroom, the mock discussion, I got so incredibly lucky with one of the teachers that I followed on Instagram. One of the professors, he's leading a class in the fall on my favorite TV show of all time. He was the one leading the mock discussion. And it was this moment of, well, it gets even better. The dean of the program's kids went to my sister's school. So he knew my education so incredibly like intimate. Like he knew it. He knew what I had learned. He knew the level of education I was getting. And he had told me, he was like, don't worry about your math grades. Like, because I have to take calculus. And he was like, don't worry about it. Like, we're going to work with you because we know the kind of education you have. And if you're pulling A's out of those humanities classes, like you're so far ahead. Well, I got so lucky that the mock classroom we had to do for interviews, the text they had given us, it cited a bunch of authors in it, and a bunch of different movements and works. Well, within the last 8 weeks, I had read every single one of those authors. Every single one of those authors on that text, that author, Sartre and on existentialism that he cited, I had just read. And so in the discussion, for the first time in my life, really, I was probably the most well-read in the room when it came to this subject, because I had just read every single author in here. And for the first time at the end of it, and this was such validation, and it's a little bit, I'm bragging on myself a little bit, but I'd spent all these years being so scared of my classmates, and at the end of the classroom, two of the other students came and shook my hand, and they were like, it was an absolute joy and honor getting to debate with you, because you clearly have the ability to articulate your point and to defend it. And then the teacher came over to me, the professor, and he said, you were the only person who was really able to say, I disagree with you on a subject that everybody had been talking about. Prove it, and then change the opinions of the classroom. And I felt so much of like, I may not have pulled the best grades on my papers out of this, but if there's anything I learned, I took away the fundamental principles of how to talk and and it was so validating. I said, even if I didn't get in, and I wrote a letter to the dean of the program. I said, I just want to let you know that even if I did not get into the honors college, the opportunity to get to be in that room, to get to discuss things in a classroom, it was so validating for my own education to prove all of those years of people asking me, so you're learning what? What do you mean you don't ever learn about World War II? it was healing. This entire year has been so healing for me. What seems like minor things for people, every other person in my life is also applying to colleges. Well, I didn't think I was going to be able to go after those mistakes, and so it's been such a year of healing and of growth for me. And so I'm so excited for what the next 4 years hold, what the next 20, what the next quarter of my life, because I am in the closing minutes of my first quarter of life, like we talked about in yours. And so I'm so excited to see what's next because of how much I've learned already. It makes me ask, what more can I learn now? Because what I think may be the final step is just the first of many. And so that's something that I've really taken away from it, and it's changed the way I view life.
Love it. I love it, Sunshine. You're doing great. You're on a phenomenal journey. And again, man, I am just so proud of you. Everything you just relayed in this podcast episode. Again, leadership, gold, money. So I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Thanks for sharing your story. We didn't even get into some of the details, but I think that was absolutely perfect. Thank you for sharing. And then let's always remember, regardless of what happens, let's be
Let's
able to
all be able
talk
to talk from generation to generation.
generation.
We're going to get that eventually. But if y'all enjoyed the episode, you can check us out on Facebook at Generation to Generation, on Instagram at G2G_podcast, or on YouTube at Generation to Generation. In our social media bios, we have a link tree that shows you literally everything of where you can find us, our resources. And if you have any topics you would like for us to talk about, let us know. We run out of topics all the time, and so if you have questions, we would love to talk about them.
See you guys.